We have Mr. Nelson Salem. So the purpose of this group is to put people in a room together that would normally never be in a room together, putting people in a room that have like minds, that have like spirits, and this relationship is a result of this group. I met Nelson through this group, well, through Steve, but getting more familiar through this group. And tonight what we want to talk about is still got a lot of knowledge. He's flipped over 600 properties. He has a rental portfolio. He has his hands in a bunch of other different type of businesses. Like every time I talk to you, I always leave with my eyebrows raised and my hands shaking. I'm saying I got to do better in life. I got to do better. So, without further ado, because I think it's going to be a nice, fruitful conversation. I don't want to be too long on the introduction. Everybody, put your hands together for Brother Nelson Salem.
Thank you all very much.
Nelson, so first off, how do you even get started in the real estate business from the beginning?
Well, I started off 2001. My father was into this business, and it was a long journey. You know, it's on and off, and throughout the years, you know, I think I learned truthfully from the best in the business. You know, the old school people that believed in books. There was not much of social media as there is today, and they believed in writing. You know what I mean? Everything has to be documented, and in the beginning, it was hard to kind of adjust yourself. You know, your mentality is completely different than a lot of these guys, and I was able to absorb that throughout time. You know, you make a lot of mistakes in life, and then you readjust and you refigure out yourself, and it's hard to kind of take on other people's footsteps. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Meaning by following it. Everybody has certain criteria in life and certain accomplishments they want to achieve, and I kind of had to take it the long way and the hard way because my mentality was different. Back then in 2001, new construction was going for about $60,000, $70,000, you know. And growing up, you always had that mindset where, you know, you want to be that $1 million man, you know, and it's like thinking about it, you know, looking at my father back in the day, and it's hard to say, man, but his mentality was asset, and then my mentality was like, man, you know, $60,000, and you add up how many houses you're gonna have to sell to make that $1 million, and I'm like, I'm gonna go take a different route, you know. Yeah. And I took the different route, and it was kind of rough, you know, but down the road, you know, when you're young and you have a lot of money, and you kind of do stupid decisions, and excuse my French, but
Yeah.
you know, you make that money and you kind of blow it. And then it was in 2004 I had a turning point. You know, it was a complete turning point for me, and my father passed away, and he had multiple properties, and take into consideration before that, you know, every time I would meet up with him, and I'd look at him, and he'll tell me literally, like, look around you, everywhere you go you see money, and I never looked at it as that way. The way how I looked at it is how much money you have in your pocket, you know what I mean? I never looked at it as asset-wise. But in 2004, when he passed away, it was really a life changer for me, because number one, I was at a financial status where I didn't really need the money. You know, I kind of built my my money, and I was rolling, and I thought I was on top of the world, and coming to realize after he passed away, you know, we had to do a succession, and when we did the succession, I was basically in debt about $200,000. So my mentality kind of changed. You know, your father passes away with multiple properties. You would expect to get some things in return, but he was kind of using what they're using today, the BRR method, which is he was purchasing properties, refinancing, renting them out, and the price point at that time didn't really help. You know, the ARVs weren't really there, and I was eventually able to kind of pay off them debts and kind of go on from there. But really, what really got me into real estate after that was I had a lot of capital. You know, money, people kind of tend to think money is everything, and in reality, once you get to a certain point, money is a problem. You know, money is a problem having for several reasons. I mean, everybody wants that $1 million dream. You get that $1 million, and then you're sitting on it, and you're looking at it, and it's not producing anything. And the only thing it's doing is really depreciating. You know what I mean? It's just sitting there. So then I came back in 2004, 2005, and I owned several personal properties for myself. And unfortunately, I didn't have any insurance. You know, and Katrina hit 2005, and I went into like that depression mood.
Yeah.
And I left for about a good 2 years. You know, I moved down to Chicago. When I moved down to Chicago, I had family over there, and I opened a fast food couple of places, and I was doing pretty good, but it wasn't my lifestyle, you know. You get used to certain lifestyle, you get used to certain income, and it's hard to kind of adjust. So I came back about a year later, and I kind of refigured myself. And the good part about it is he had a lot of good friends. You know, he knew a lot of people.
Talking about your dad.
Yeah, he knew a lot of good people. One of them was a really, really good friend that kind of really schooled me through. And his name was actually James. You know, and I sat with him, and I met up with him, and he knew I was kind of in a bad spot, but I did have a little bit of capital to start off at that time.
And how old are you right now?
I was about in the 30s,
Okay.
young 30s,
Okay.
you know. And my vision was, you know, it wasn't because of the money. I didn't want to do it because of the money. You know, I wanted to grow over time. You know, and when first thing that I went there, and it really felt like I was going to school again. He gave me this real estate contract, and he's like, study the contract, and I'm like, study the contract, you know. And he's like, study the contract. You got to learn the ins and the outs of the real estate contract. And I go home, and I'm telling my mom, I'm like, this guy gave me a freaking contract to study the contract, and I look at it. I mean, I sold real estate before. You know, you look at the contract and typical contract. And I go back to him, I'm like, I've seen this thing a couple of times. He's like, no, you didn't study the contract, you know. I was like, my intentions are not to be a real estate agent.
Right.
You know, he's like, you don't have to be a real estate agent. But if you don't understand what you're getting into from the first place, you'll never, you know, be able to kind of know what you're getting into, you know. So I studied the contract, and there's a lot of ins and outs about the contract, right? So the first thing that I had to do was kind of organize myself. And what I mean by organizing myself is understanding the contract, understanding the liability, understanding the disclosures. That way, down the road, I wouldn't run into any problems. And by understanding the contracts, you know, a lot of agents these days, it's unfortunate that they have a lot of professional agents, but at the same time, it's really easy to get a real estate license.
Yeah.
So a lot of fellow agents are just coming in because of the paycheck, but they don't understand executing the contract. You know, one thing is putting the property under contract, but the main thing is executing the contract, you know? And that's kind of something that we're falling into right now. If you pay attention to the market, we have a lot of properties that are going under contract, back on the market, going under contract, and back on the market. And by meaning that is purchase, you know, even when you come to purchase in a competitive market, the way how you write up the contract really plays a big difference as well.
Yeah, but
Now-
I wanted to ask you, so you mentioned liabilities, right? So tell us a little bit about what you learned, just to back up a little bit. When you say you didn't have insurance, 2004, 2005, why was that a problem? What
It was a
happened?
huge problem. So in 2004, 2005, I was one of them people that had properties on Magazine. I don't know if people remember Magazine before, prior to Katrina, was kind of like the hood. You know, so, and there's a lot of stories that go through my head, but in 2004, 2005, I was one of the people that sold properties on Magazine for $50,000, $60,000, you know. And it's crazy because at that time, I was in Metairie, and they had investors that came in from other states. And I own commercial property uptown. And they had a couple of guys kind of similar to what we have right now from New York, and they're talking, and I get into the conversation, and I get into their head, and they had at least about 50 to 60 files at that time. 50 to 60 real estate files. And I get into their head, and I'm like,
What you mean files? What's
files meaning properties.
Okay.
You know, they had about 50 or 60 properties. And I get into their head, and I'm like, what are you guys doing here? And they're like, we're investing in Mid-City. Right? At that time, my brother was with me too. And I'm like, Mid-City. And they were buying these properties for like $60,000. And I'm like, these guys don't know what the hell they're talking about. You know, I got a freaking property, a commercial property like 3 blocks away, you know, and they're buying these for $50,000-$60,000, and look at what Mid-City is today, you know what I mean? They made triple their money. So they had inside scoops, but they also used their leverage, meaning by you get to use their comps, and this is something we're going to discuss later on, is being able to use your own property as comp. You know what I mean? Throughout time, you'll get to understand what it means, and I'm going to use that. I got 4 properties on one street right now, and I'm just going to use it in the last, for example, 2-year period. I listed a property last year, 1,000 square feet, 165,000. I kind of banked it on it. I had multiple offers. It reached to 205. Appraisal comes back 165, which was the highest sold per square foot at that time. I come back another 4 months on the same block, same square footage, and I list it for 179,000. And I get it appraised for 175,000. So I used my old comp and I appreciated $10,000. I tried to do it the third time, and I was fortunate, but I wasn't fortunate to get an extra $10,000. I made an extra $5,000 off that same comp because it's under the 6-month period. Now I have one listed on the same street. You always want to be the smaller guy to get the more square footage on the block. You know, I would choose the smaller houses because you get more per square foot than the bigger houses. I got another one right now, and it's unfortunate that I wasn't able to, you know, to use that same comp. But it got to a point where I was using my own comps in an appreciating market, and I would at least come out $10,000 within a 4-month period with the same amount of square footage, you know. So with that being said, throughout the years, I was able to accomplish about 56 rentals. I had at one point about 56 rentals, and I was generating enough income to where I would buy a property every month.
And we talking back in
About
04,
this was exactly right at 2008. You know, 2008, 2009, I was buying them in the sweet spots, $50,000, $60,000, leasing them out $1,200, mostly Section 8. You know, so I was generating about $50,000, $60,000 a month. Every month I would buy another house. I would not use that income at all. I would purchase another house with that money. Come around 2014, 2015, I started on kind of the flip game, you know, where I had to unload some, I needed some cash. So at that time, I thought I sold top dollar. Obviously, I didn't. You know, there was a lot of properties that I sold for $180,000 and completely renovated, man. People lived there for a couple of years, and they came back, turned around, and they just recently sold them for $250. Kudos to them, you know, but that's how the market plays, you know. But what happened at that time was I was purchasing properties for $50,000, $60,000. I was leasing them out for $1,200. And within 4 years, that property basically paid for itself, completely paid for itself. You know, and when I came back to return, you know, to kind of resell it, I would put about $20,000, $30,000 into it, and I sell it for $180,000. I'm netting about $150,000 a property. You know, and that kind of helped me a lot on building my portfolio. And I did it multiple times, man. And right now we're at a stage where the market's about to change. You know, and I think the opportunity is going to be there. If you're in this business right now at this current moment for a short period of time and think that you're going to get rich within a year or two, you're completely in the wrong business. But if you look at it as a long run, I promise you, within 8 years, you will be in that more than that 6-figure. You know,
how did you get out of the slump in Katrina? Because you said you didn't have insurance. So with taking all those losses, what was it like building back to get back?
I had a little bit of capital, and this was where good help comes in. You know, close friends come in. They lead you to the right direction. You know, meaning by when they lead you to the right direction, I was scattered all over the place. You know, I was from Kenner all the way up to La Place, all the way up to the Westbank, and I was just buying deals that made, you know, I want less investment, more return, right? So it got to a point where I had enough rental, and my liquid, meaning my money, was kind of going on the low side, so I had to sell a lot of them. I transferred that money, you know, and I repeated it, meaning if I was to put a third of my purchase price in renovations, that means I would have to get rid of it because I have too much in it. if I was to go into a property and I'm changing the bathrooms and I'm changing the kitchen, which is the major things in the property, 90% of the time I would go in there and just resell it. If I'm gonna put lipstick on it and I gotta spend a little bit of money, that's usually when I hold them, because I don't have to put too much equity in them, you know, and it kind of built through that. But my biggest change really happened in 2014. You know, 2014, I was making over 6 figures a year. And the reason why that happened was because of my rental portfolio. You know, I started off with a couple of rentals. Over time, for a period of time, they were all paid. I mean, I never had a finance on them from the get-go because I was buying them really cheap, but they paid for themselves about $60,000 to $70,000 within that 4-year period, and I was probably putting about $30,000 into them. And I remember the 2015, 16, I was selling them probably netting about $150,000 each.
Yeah. So you come back from Chicago. You sit down. You have this meeting with your dad's friend, right?
Yes.
So what did it look like building this portfolio from the beginning? Because you lost it all with Katrina. You did have a little bit of capital. So that first house, because
Before I purchased any properties, the first thing I did was I made sure that I had a CPA that was on my side from the get-go. Somebody that I knew that I wanted to grow with. You know, it wasn't somebody that I had the intentions of not growing with. So I had the CPA, and I explained to him, he was with me from day one, you know what I mean? And I still got the same, my team is the same team since 2001. Same CPA. Even a lot of the agents are the same agents that I started off with. You know, some of them retired, some of them are still in the game. My True Title, a couple of title companies that were also in there, I've done a lot of business with them. And it's the same people, same circle, man. And then everybody grows together. This is the point of real estate, is growing together. You know, there's a lot of opportunities over there. I know the market been dry for a lot of us the past couple of years. It's unfortunate, but the time's coming where there's enough for everybody to eat. You know, everybody's got to grow. You know, that you could only take on certain amount of projects. And then another thing is the contractor part. You know, the contractor part took me a long time to build. You know, everybody kind of looks at everybody's pie. When you're making $150,000, you know, on a flip, and you got a contractor that's walking out with $5,000, $6,000, you know, and to him, I mean, it's money. You know, you're making an extra $5,000, $6,000, but they're also looking at your pie. You know, you want to make sure that everybody's satisfied, that you could grow with them. You know, that's another point right there, because I'm running into that issue right now with a lot of the guys. It's really hard finding good help, even though I have guys that have been with me for a long time, but you could only afford taking care of a certain amount of people. You can't take care of, you know, 10, 12 families for a long period of time, you know, so you got to stick to a couple of guys that are willing to grow and take that long route with you. But at the same time, you got to be able to kind of guarantee that they're going to be where they want to be down the road with you. You know, you can't just cut them off whenever you want to.
yeah,
You know?
that's big.
And a lot of times, you take the loss, you know. So this is a part of the game. It's not all about making money. You got to also accept, you know, losing money before you ever gain money. You know, so I took a lot of hits, you know, within my career. And until today, I take a lot of hits. You know, I got a couple of framing guys. Today, I had a framing guy that worked with me, and they reframed the pitch, and I'm looking at them, and I kind of see it in their eyes where they're not happy where they're at. You know, and I go up to them and I tell them, hey, listen, if I got to come up a couple of $1,000s, I'll come up a couple of $1,000s. But that's the name of the game. You got to make sure that everybody's comfortable for you to be comfortable.
Why?
You know?
Why is that important, though?
It's important because I'm going to tell you, you know, over the years, what I learned is sometimes you get into critical spots where you need these guys, you know. And what I mean by needing these guys, sometimes you might get a bad deal, you know, and they'll go out their way to kind of make it happen. You know, I want the guys that I could call 9 o'clock at night and I know that they're going to be there. You know, I don't want the guys that, oh, wait, I'm kind of busy and I got to come back tomorrow. When I need it done, I need it done. And you got to pay for that service, you know.
Yeah. So how you find them?
Over time, you know, over time. And then you build, the main thing is you can't build your relationship with a lot of these guys based on money, right? So a lot of these guys, they come in bad times. You know, they fall into debts just like any one of us. You know, sometimes you're filthy rich and sometimes you're on your last leg. You know, and if you're on your last leg, you kind of go to the people that you feel comfortable with, you know, and that plays a big factor. You know, it plays a really big factor. You know, and throughout the years, I was able to build that trust with them. And a lot of these guys, believe it or not, I'll send them to the project, and I don't even agree with them on price. You know, I'll just tell them, go do it.
Yeah.
You know, they go do it, and sometimes I'm really satisfied with the price they give me, and sometimes it might cost me a little bit more, but that's the name of the game.
Yeah.
You know?
So how did 2006, 2007, how does that Nelson even find properties? What did that first property look like? That first transaction look like after you had that meeting? What was the first property like, and then how do you start building up steam to continuously get these properties to build that portfolio? What was
I'm going to be honest with you. The beginning was really hard. The beginning was very, very hard. There was a lot of sharks out there, you know, and a lot of guys don't want to, you know, kind of teach you the game. You know, they kind of mislead you, you know, and they look at you like the young guy on the block coming in and trying to eat out of their plate, you know, so it was really hard. But I tell you, one really important thing is reputation, man. Reputation plays a big role. Over my career, I have not missed a closing. The only time I missed a closing was because of disclosure, something that I had no knowledge of that popped up at the last minute. That's number one. Number two is if you have people around you that have been in this game for a long time, you learn a lot from them, and their reputation matters more than yours, especially if you're starting off. You know, so if you got an agent that's been in the game for a pretty long time, and there's a lot of good agents, you know, that have been in the game and they're well respected, their word kind of helps you a lot, you know. So if you put in an offer on a multiple property and you're not able to execute them, you know, it's a small community, you know. Everybody knows everybody in this market, you know. It's a small circle. I mean, we're a mom and pop state over here, you know, especially in the New Orleans market. Everybody knows everybody. So it's, if you build that, like, I'm gonna be honest with you, I have an X list, you know, of agents. Even if they pay me more than full price, I will not do business with them. And it's really sad to say, because I've been through multiple transactions with them where they're not able to execute, you know what I mean? Like, I remember one time I had 3 properties on the market at the same time, and the agent puts for the same buyer 3 offers on 3 of my properties, and they don't know that I own all three of them at the same time, you know, and I'm getting offers, and I'm looking at, and I'm like, how the hell you put 3 offers on 3 of my properties at the same time, you know what I mean? But that's the kind of thing that reputation really matters in this business. It's a really important business. You are in for a long run. You know, if you're in for a long run, in a short period of time, it's not really, you're not going to really make, I mean, you might, in the market that we're in right now, you would be able to make a little bit of money, but you're not going to go on for what's coming up in the near future, you know.
Right. So that reputation got you
Where I'm at right now, believe it or not, in the past 5-6 years, I really don't look for many deals. Deals just come to me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of times, a lot of guys are in bad spots where their buyer backs out, and opportunities presented, and I'll be able to pick it up. Now, with that being said, you have to be very, very knowledgeable of what you're getting into. You know, what I mean by that is just by walking into a house, you know, you kind of feel it out. You know what you're going to be facing, how you're going to be facing. Just by looking at the house, over time, you'll have an idea of how much it's going to cost you to renovate, what the ARV is, you know, the neighborhoods. I've been around the Westbank for a pretty long time, and I kind of know the neighborhoods by heart, and I know the ARV by heart, and I have a really clear minded of what it's going to cost me to kind of get where I need to be at, you know.
right. So the first property, you remember that?
Yeah, absolutely.
What was it?
It was in Marrero, right off of Barretera on Highland Drive.
2007?
2007,
2007.
yeah.
What happened?
2007.
Well, how did you find it? So, and I'm asking this question for the people that's kind of in that same spot, either went up and then went down, or got in the business and got out and got back. So how did you
2007,
rebuild?
there was a lot of properties on the market. You know, you kind of could flex. If you had cash, you were king. You know, you put in offers $20,000 less than what they're asking, you were able to pick it up. You know, it wasn't as competitive as it is right now. That's number one. Number two, there wasn't many investors. You know, it was a handful of investors that were in the flip game, and everybody was kind of making money. You know, properties, like I said, the properties were going cheap. You know, the guys right now are making $50,000, $60,000 on a flip, maybe even a little bit more than that. Back then, you would be lucky to make maybe $15,000, $20,000, but the $15,000 back then was a lot more than what it is today. You know, the dollar unfortunately really depreciated. You know, the market value is kind of different right now. Times change, you know, but it was a lot easier finding these properties. And then another thing that I wanted to take into consideration was the help that I had, the people that were around me, you know, the audience that I wanted to get was completely different. So when I transformed from 2012, 2013, my mindset was different. You know, I knew what I wanted. You know, I wanted to kind of concentrate on first-time home buyers, which I mentioned to you the other day. You know, when I was in the Kenner market, Metairie market, the average properties were going for around the $300,000 range, you know. The Westbank, I wanted to be around that 200 sweet spot, you know, about the $200,000 range. First of all, my buyers were different. You know, first-time home buyers, they're anxious to get their foot in the door. Properties were selling quick. Most of their loans are about 200 grand at that time. You get more for your money on the Westbank than you did in Metairie. So that's what kind of why I transformed to the Westbank area, because I wanted to build that rental portfolio in the Westbank. So when I come back and I turn it around, I wouldn't have problem in selling it. So when I did come back and I decided on getting rid of my rental portfolio, honestly, average days on market weren't more than 30 days. You know, they were gone because I was at under that 200 mark, you know. They were going like hotcake. They weren't picky. Meanwhile, I had a couple of flips in Metairie, you know, and they were going for like 350, and I had to deal with cherry picking. You know, most of them had conventional loans. They were putting money down. They had a little bit of money, you know, and they were cherry picking, you know. So it's a different mindset, you know, and not just the mindset, it's time. You know, time is more valuable. I always say it all the time. You could always buy properties, but you can't buy time. You know, your time is very, very valuable. And if you know how much your time is worth, that's really how you could generate more, you know. And I don't really care about how much I make off of a flip as much as I care as how much time I'm going to spend in it, you know. So if I could go in there and put some lipstick on it within a week and make 10 grand, I'm satisfied with 10 grand instead of making 50 grand within 3 months. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's an in and out operation.
So how else you measure? I know you mentioned if you got to spend over a third, it's a flip. What's some other metrics that's in the back of your mind, whether you decide whether I'm going to keep this as a rehab or I'm going to keep it as a rental?
One of the main things is cash. You know, you could be in this business, you could be the richest man alive and you could be the brokest man alive within 2 months.
What you mean?
Because this is an addiction. You know, it really is. You know, it's an addiction, man. It's sad to say. Sometimes, you know, you got a little bit of money, and I paid full price for houses before, you know, but just because I got that extra money kind of laying around, and a lot of times it honestly is an addiction. Once you get to it, it's a lifestyle, you know. You got a little bit of money and you're looking at it and it's not doing anything. You end up paying full price for a property, you lease it out. And the next thing you know, after 4 or 5 years, you got a little bit of equity in it, you get rid of it, you know. So it's a really big problem. Cash is not, cash just depreciates over time. That's the way how I look at it. Property always appreciates, regardless, even if you come through dips, you come through high interest rates. Flood insurance is a big factor right now, but over time, property is the way to go.
Yeah, so your reputation kind of help you build up your portfolio, which is great advice. So talk about your crews. So if you build enough momentum with your reputation, people throwing properties at you, you mine them off the MLS.
Not all of them off the MLS. So
what else?
I'm getting some through wholesalers, and I'm getting my main source, to be honest, which is through banks. You know, through banks, I was fortunate enough in 2008, 2009. I was a heavy hitter. You know, I was buying a lot of these properties, bank-owned properties. So I kind of built a trustworthy relationship with a lot of these guys, regional managers that are responsible for loans. So they started kind of giving me a lot of inside scoop where they just kind of wanted the payoffs, you know what I mean? And I would pick them up and close within literally 2-3 days. You know, if the title was clear, I'll be on that. I'll be the first to sit on that table. You know, So I built that relationship, and they kind of helped me kind of move forward. You know, because properties were sitting on the market at that time.
Yeah.
You know, they were sitting for 40, 50 days, you know, and they were just wandering around.
What
And the
year,
bank,
what year we talking now? We passed-
2007, 2008,
Okay.
2009,
Mhm.
you know, around that area. And the average properties were going for about $50,000, $60,000. I remember, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I was probably one of the first investors that kind of really dumped money in Woodmere.
Mhm.
You know, Woodmere was kind of my go-to spot. They were going for very, very cheap in Woodmere. You know, they were going for 30s, you know, 30s, $40,000. You know, and I remember one time I had a real estate agent, and I'm telling them I'm going into Woodmere, and they're looking at me like, Woodmere? You know, why are you going into Woodmere? I was like, I want to invest in Woodmere. Yeah, and I purchased that year, I think I purchased like 16 properties in Woodmere. I was all over Woodmere, you know what I mean? And I was leasing them out, Section 8, $1,200, easy, all day, you know, leasing them out. And it's funny because about 3 or 4 years ago, I think I had the highest sold comps in Woodmere for a good year. Like if you look at the highest sold comps at that time, at least 4 or 5 out of the 10 were probably my sold comps, you know, and at that time people looked at Woodmere like it was, you know, it wasn't what it is today. You know, today you look at Woodmere houses going for 250,
Yep.
you know, 250, $260,000. And this is kind of the same idea that's going on right now with the transformation. You know, a lot of people now are looking at Bridge City, Westwego, Avondale, and those areas. Those are going to be the first-time home buyer areas. You know, you're buying them for $50,000, $60,000. They never reach $200,000. The properties that are selling there used to go for about $120,000, $130,000. But if you think about it this way, if you got a buyer that's looking for in the 200 price range, where are you going to go to?
Yeah.
You know, another factor is the flood insurance right now. You know, flood insurance is going to really have a big impact on a lot of these buyers. You know, it's a big factor because even in an X flood zone, the average right now is about $2,000 in an X. So you can imagine on an AE, which is going to bring the buying power really down right now.
What was it before that you remember? So
X flood zone was always about in the hundreds, $400 or $500. You know what I mean? $300, $400, $500. For that jump into $2,000 is a big factor. Another thing is the home insurance. You know, home insurance went sky high too. So that's going to bring the buying power down. Now, the best way how I look at it, in 2008, 2009, there was a lot of ways where you could structure deals. Meaning by structuring deals is these heavy tickets. They were doing a lot of owner finance. You know, they were sitting on the market for a pretty long time, $300,000, $400,000, the owner finance type of thing. You were able to structure those out because there wasn't much capital out there. You know, you were able to buy a regular house for about 150. Then you got all these houses that are popping up for 300,000. And not many people wanted to be around that ballpark, you know what I mean? It was a kind of heavy ticket. And a lot of guys I know structured a lot of owner finance deals through them properties, and they just turned around recently and probably sold them for $500,000-$600,000 easy,
Wow.
you know?
Yeah.
So there's a lot to do with it. You know, my advice to all the new guys over here is that, you know, if you're in the business and you're just getting into the business, concentrate on FHA, first-time home buyers, quick. You know, these guys want to come in, they want to buy the house, they're anxious to get to buy you know, first-time home buyers. They're not really too picky. You're in the 200 sweet spot. You know, you're buying these houses, you're making your money. You know, even if you got to leasing them out throughout the years, you're buying these houses for $50,000. You remember, even if the dip happens, the market might depreciate a little bit, but rent never depreciates. So you're always going to get that steady income. You know, that cash flow is going to come in for 4 or 5 years. You come back around and you just turn them around, and I'm pretty sure within 4 years you're going to have your money back, and then you just cash out.
Yeah.
You know, easy cash out, easy. You know, if you're investing $50,000 and you got to put $20,000 into it, that's $70,000 all in. You know, within 4 years you're probably going to make at least $60,000 in return with the rent. You know, you renovate it, you put another $20,000, and you come back another 4 or 5 years and you list it for $199. You're cashing out $180,000 a property. If you got 5 properties, it goes an easy million.
Yeah.
You know, but then you're going to have the problem that I have is like, where are you going to go with that money? You know what I mean? And
So talk a little bit about that. So even with that cash and those properties, the renovation component of this business. Talk to me about the beginning part of that. How do you even build a crew when you don't even have one from scratch?
Well, I had a crew, but it wasn't a full-time crew, you know, meaning they were on and off. You know, these guys, everybody's in the business to make money. So if you had a crew that was, for For example, these guys, they like doing subcontracting, where they try to make a couple of $100 extra here and there. I ran into this issue recently with the hurricane. I was paying my guys, a lot of my guys, I got them on payroll. I was giving them about $200, a day before the hurricane. The guys that were,
Ida, the most recent,
the most recent one. And it's unfortunate that a lot of these guys, they were making $400 or $500 a day. I can't hold them back, but what I could do is probably readjust it, And a lot of them, I kind of did readjust it, where I was giving them about $300 a day, $300 a day. So some of them stuck with me and some of them left. Now, the good part about it is they leave for a certain period of time and then they come back. When it starts slowing down, everybody starts calling you back. Hey, you think I got a place? And a lot of these guys, to be honest with you, I put them back into play. Mm-hmm. It's unfortunate that it's really hard to find good help these days. The new generation just wants easy money. They don't want to put in the work. They don't want to put in the labor. They don't want to put in the time, but they want that easy money.
Yeah.
And a lot of these, I got a lot of people on my team that have been with me for a pretty long time. They put in the work. They know what I'm looking for. Execution is a big thing. The market change right now is a big thing. I really need these guys in the future because the market's about to change. The past couple of years, I kind of been slacking off. And this is a good meetup right here because it kind of reminds me where I got to come back at, Mm-hmm. The reason why I say that, sometimes we get too comfortable. Being comfortable is a really bad thing, because you kind of fall off track. The market been so hot, everybody kind of got it easy where you list these properties, second day, third day, they're under contract, and mm-hmm. you build that confidence where you don't have to go 100% in execution, meaning the last 10% of any project is the really most important part of executing the project. What I mean?
What you mean by that?
What I mean is, full renovations kind of plays a big factor. Right now, there's very little renovated houses. So you list a renovated house right now, most likely, or maybe about 2 months ago, most likely you'll have it under contract within 1 or 2 days. And the reason why you'll have it under contract within 1 or 2 days is because there's not many renovated houses out there. Yeah, that's number one. Number two, the renovation, you don't go all out, meaning by 5 1/4 trim, you start putting 3-inch trim. You don't have to put the backsplashes. You don't have to put the granite. There's a lot of things you could get by with a hot market. Mm-hmm. Before it wasn't like that. Before you got to kind of cherry pick the house. If you want top dollar, you really got to put a lot of effort into it. The past couple of years, I'm gonna be honest with you. I put a lot of houses I did kind of lipstick them. I list them back on and. They go on the market, and you sell them within a day. But right now, it's the time where readjusting comes in. And what I mean by readjusting, several things. Before the market ever got hot, my crew and I were very picky. What I mean by very picky, even after I finished the project, I had a girl that works with me till today full time. She would go back and cherry pick the property. What I mean by cherry pick is, she would walk around the house with a flashlight, turn off all the lights, and see if there's any tape, if there's any lines showing in the walls. Very little details. She had to make sure that the houses always were presentable. What I mean by presentable, that they were clean, that they had a nice odor, that they had, paper on the floor for when anybody walks in, first-time home buyer or whatever walks in, that they have that kind of fresh, new construction smell in it, you know what I mean? And that's really what got me to this point right now, is I was able to execute that, and that's a really important factor in the days to come. You want to be different than everybody else, you know what I mean? Everybody could do renovations. If you're in to put lipstick in the near future, it's not gonna work. You're just wasting, time, days on market. If you're going in to execute perfection, you're gonna go a long way. You got to go out your way. You got to get out of your comfort zone. You got to kind of go and do a little bit more than what we usually, the past couple of years have been doing.
Yeah. So what made you go with hiring a crew, paying by day versus just partnering up with a few subs or a few GCs and just let them deal with the headache of the babysitting and guys not showing up for work or showing up late? Why have your own crew versus having multiple people to partner up with that you could call?
honestly, it's execution. Execution, not at this time, but execution for my previous flips. What I mean by execution, if you give these guys contract, all what they care about is going in and out. You know, they don't care about the perfection of the job. It was costing me about the same right now as it's costing me before. You know, you give a sheetrock contractor to do a project, all what he cares about is going in, short period of time, finishing it up, throwing the texture. And then when you come back and you tell them about, you know, it's funny because sometimes I'll have a wall with like 16 different tape marks, you know, where some nails are showing or something, and you come back and you tell them, hey, you got to fix this, and they don't want to hear that, you know. Where I pay them daily, they give it the right amount of time. You know, they know what I want. They know what I'm looking for. They know exactly what I'm cherry picking, you know. And one of the main reasons that I've been able to go so far is I hire females. You know, nobody has a vision like the females. You know, they cherry pick everything. You know, so I put 2 of them in there. There's a lot of things I don't even see, to be honest with you, man. They see it better than I do.
Yeah.
You know, especially in like kitchens and bathrooms. You know, and I hire these girls, and I send my gut tile guy, a lot of times over there, my finish guy, to kind of go back over there. If you're expecting to get top dollar, you have to put in the effort. You know, you have to execute it 100%, especially in a competitive market.
How you recruit a team like that? So even if you're running a perfection team like that, well, like, where do you even start to find a drywall guy, to find a tile guy, to even bring him in and make him adopt your culture?
This is you got to put an effort with them, right? So a lot of the people that know me know that I'm obviously, you know, it's very rare to see me wearing clean clothes. That's number one. Very rare. You know, I'm a guy that likes to put my hands on with them. You know, these guys, if they know you know the trade, they will try to execute perfection. You know, if you got a roof that you got to frame and you're not on top of that roof, and they know you don't have that much of a knowledge, they'll try to take advantage of it, right? So if they know that you're willing to put the sweat and you're willing to go in and start framing with them, they're going to make sure that it's done on 100%. And on top of that, a lot of times what I do is, you know, if I make a good profit out of a flip or out of a property in general, I like to tip my guys. You know, I like them to keep them close. You know, and a lot of these guys, man, I've been knowing, honest to God, there's some guys that have been working with me for a good 16, 17 years, and they're happy.
Yeah.
You know, they're happy. I mean, the biggest example was last year. I had a guy that been with me for about 13 years, and within the 13 years, I think he bought probably 2 cars. You know, and it was Christmas time, and they pull up with their raggedy Toyota, and I had a Toyota Tundra, and probably a lot of the folks remember me in it, and Christmas time, and I gave them that Toyota. You know, it meant a lot to them. You know what I mean? You got to appreciate these guys, man, because remember one thing, a lot of guys could have money, right? So if you want to think about it as the money wise, a lot of guys could become investors if they got the capital, but it's the crew around you that makes a lot of a difference. You know, it's the agents, it's the circle that's around you. I like to keep my guys close, you know, even if it's going to cost me a little bit more, but that's one of the main reasons how I grew, is because of the people around me, you know. Yeah, and I'm dedicated to them, man.
So out of hits and some of them go away, how do you replace them? Where do you go?
Replacing part is a very, very hard part. You know, replacement is very hard. You know, I've been trying to replace a lot of guys for the past 2 or 3 years, and it's just not working, man. You know, that's why, you know, before Ida happened, a lot of the guys that leave and they call me to come back, honest to God, I wouldn't bring them back. And I was like, you lost the opportunity. I got a new guy. But right now, man, it's just hard. You know, they call me back. You know, hey, can we get a job back? And hey, sure, why not? You know, you got to take it like a champ. You know, you got to take the good and the bad. You know, but I'd rather deal with that than deal with somebody that you got to train. You know, for 6 months, and then after 6 months, he gets paid. He'll find an opportunity to make $2 more an hour, and he's gone. You know, and then another factor is these guys, they want to show up early. You know, it's hard to get in guys early birds. You know, you tell these guys 7 o'clock in the morning. I just ran into this incident a couple of days ago. You know, I got cameras on my projects, so I have the bad apples kind of freaking convert the good apples into becoming bad apples. You know what I mean? I had a girl that's been with me for probably 7 years. And this girl would always show up 7:30. 7:30 on the job site, and I hired this freaking 2 new guys. They show up like at 8:30, right? Now keep in mind, this girl, she had another helper. Every day 7:30, they always show up on point. Man, I'm looking at my cameras. Third day, she starts showing up at 8:30. Fourth day, she shows up at 8:30. I got rid of the other guys, and she still shows up at 8:30. You know what I mean? And it's like, I call her, I'm like, what's going on?
Right.
The schedule, you show up 7:30 to 4:30, everybody's happy, and you put in your time, and everybody goes their way. So I had to cut her off. I actually cut her off for about 2 days, and then I had to talk to her, and we came back on track. She shows up 7:30, 4:30. I don't want you to put a minute after 4:30.
Yeah. Where did the bad apples come from?
Man, let me tell you, you run into a lot of those these days.
Yeah.
Bad apples are everywhere these days. A lot of guys, you got people, that never done construction in their life, and all of a sudden they know everything, And it's funny because I took a picture when Ida first hit. It was a Toyota Corolla with a 12-foot ladder on top of it, and says, we do roofing. I'm thinking to my head, I'm like, man, this guy probably never did roofing in his life, with the Toyota Corolla with a 12-foot ladder on it. But there's a lot of them out there. Everybody wants to jump on the money game.
Yeah.
The money game right now is construction. So everybody kind of, if I don't know them, I try not to hire them, but it's very hard. Everybody that that's been in this business for a long time, it's a money train. Everybody's making money right now. So it's hard to kind of get them underneath your wing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Everybody's kind of busy right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So you come back down, reputation, MLS banks, you feeding your beast, getting properties that way. You funding these flips yourself. You're building crews, also based on reputation. What with that portfolio you were talking about inheriting that $200,000 in debt, right?
Yes.
What's your approach now with building a portfolio after going through that experience with having all those leverage properties that you had to inherit? How you approach a rental portfolio now?
Right now, depending on my status on cash, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I was to go finance right now, first thing I would become my lender's best friend.
What you
That's
mean?
meaning right now we're still in a little bit of a competitive market. You got a lot of hungry investors, right? So there's a lot of guys that don't want to miss the opportunity. I would 100% deal local investors. I mean, local lenders, local realtors. They know more about the market. What I mean is, if you're going to go through a lender, I would have my pre-approval 100% be able to execute that contract, and that way you could start building that reputation. When I first started, I dealt with a lot of lenders for about 2 years, and then when I kind of built up that capital, I stopped really dealing with lending. But that's a really important thing, is becoming best friends, number one, with a really good agent, a really good experienced agent that is not in because of the money game, but also to protect your interest. What I mean by protect your interest is, once you start dealing with heavy numbers, you always want to protect yourself, right? Meaning by LLCs and by disclosures and by everything, because a lot of people in this business, us as investors, when you come sell, a lot of first-time home buyers, they know you got capital, right? Especially if the houses are paid off. So everybody's going to try to kind of take advantage of that, and you might get yourself into a little bit of trouble. So try to protect yourself with a CPA, number one. I'm going to give you an example. Like my rental portfolio, it was owned by another LLC. You know what I mean? So I had a property, like if you look up my rental portfolio, it was under, at that time, I think, Rental America. And that Rental America was owned by another LLC which I owned, you know what I mean? Because I ran into a lot of incidents where people would kind of take advantage over stupid reasons, like you sell them a property and the faucet's not running right after they purchased it by like 3 months. And this is a true story, it really happened to me, and they try to take it over like stupid stuff.
A lawsuit?
Yeah,
over
man.
a faucet?
Over a faucet. I swear to God, it happened before. Over a faucet. Yeah. So kind of protect yourself in that asset, and then separate your flips from your rentals. What I mean by that is, kind of know where you want to be at right when you enter the door. If you got a full gutted project, or if you're taking on a project where you're going to put 2/3 of it into renovation, honestly, I would probably flip it. And the reason why I say that is there's no tenant that would ever take care of a property like the owner. You know what I mean? So if you're putting new kitchens, new bathrooms, and you expect to get them after 4 years, the same condition that you put them in, it's not going to happen. You know, but if you got a property that you could put a little bit of lipstick on and kind of go with the flow and get some equity out of it, meaning cash flow, I would really hold on to it and run it. You know, run it 4 or 5 years, and then come back and renovate it and just turn around and sell it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But I would definitely look into, you know, protecting your asset before growing, especially on rental portfolios. You know, meaning insurance-wise, liability, and all that.
Yeah, and what about leverage? You got a different perspective now that you've seen with the extreme circumstances. If while you living, you have a portfolio, and then beyond that, if your family inherited the portfolio and its leverage. So how you look at leverage now?
Leverage right now, you know, you get to a certain part where it's not really because of the money. After a certain amount of time where you have the capital, you're really doing it because, number one, this is the best thing you could probably do. Number two is you have nothing else to do. You know what I mean? One of the main things that I looked at it is I wanted to make sure, you know, that I don't want to be in debt 30 years, right? Because 30 years is a long period of time. You can't guarantee anything in this market. Not just that, you can't guarantee your time. You know, I want to be able to pass on something that's free of debt. You know, I don't want to pass on something that my kids are going to have to worry about 20 years down the road on paying my mortgage or something that I got them into, you know. So I got to a point where I felt really comfortable in, I didn't really need the capital, so that's why I was using my own cash. And the way how I use my own cash is I'm actually my own hard money lender. You know, I have a separate LLC which funds my transactions through my money. You know, and this is another factor that you should consider down the road once you start building capital.
Yeah. So at the closing table, the HUD statement has a LLC owned by you, lending to a property
Yes.
that you buying.
Yes.
Yeah. What's some of the tax benefits you recognize or you learned by doing it that way?
Uncle Sam is always going to get his portion, man. That's a big factor I'm dealing with right now. You know, personal gains is a big issue. But I mean, you got to pay to, you know, you got to pay to play. Mm-hmm. You know, that's how it is. I mean, that's how it always been. You know, when you're doing figures. I've been on a payment plan for about 4 years now. You know, that I get hit pretty hard. I pay a lot of taxes, you know, and thinking about it a lot of times, it takes a big portion out of your check. You know, a lot of times I think about it, I'm like, why should I do it? Mm-hmm. You know, why should I grow so big? Over time, I mean, the benefits are there, and you're making money, but at the same time, man, I look at a lot of guys. And to come and pay at the end of the year over, you know, 6 figures in taxes really kind of gets you. But there's no way out of it. You know, if you're going to make money, you're going to have to spend money, and you got to pay. You got to pay what you owe.
So the theory is, if I got a good CPA, I could get out of paying taxes.
No, you're going to pay. There's no way. Listen, I'm going to tell you something, man. If you want to stay in this game, you have to be clear. You know, transparency goes a long way, right? I mean, you might be, I've been in the game for a long time, and trust me, I've seen a lot of people go under. And the reason why they go under is they're not true to themselves, and they're not true, you know, to what they're benefiting of. A lot of guys, you know, they want to come in, make a quick buck, and kind of leave. And if you're looking that way, you're not going to go too far, man. Uncle Sam's going to catch you, and then you're going to go through a lot of stuff. And then the main thing is, you know, continuously. Continuously plays a big role. You know, you're in, like I said, you're going to get to a point where it's not the money factor. It's just that this is your bread and butter. You know, this has been my bread and butter for the past 17, 18 years, and it plays a big factor in my life, and it's just my lifestyle. You know, this is what I want to be. This is where I see myself at probably the rest of my life, you know. Yeah. So my main thing is, and a lot of people, you know, I really appreciate the opportunity of being here. You know, my main thing right here is I don't want a lot of guys, I know we're in a competitive market, you know, and a lot of fellow investors look at it as competition. The way how I look at it is opportunity. You know, we learn from each other. You know, I had a fellow investor that purchased a property on the block that I live on, and I stopped by over there. It adds value, you know, the value is there. I know right now it's kind of dry, but down the road, there's a lot of opportunities, man. You know, you can't pick up all these deals. You know, a lot of times I call a lot of my friends and I tell them, hey, I got this opportunity presented to me. I just don't have time to do it. You know, you want to pick it up? And a lot of times they do pick it up. You know, the way how I look at it is time. You know, time is very important to me right now, especially in times like this. You know, we're at a changing stage right now where the ARVs aren't really there. If you got a lot of properties on your hand, right now is the time to get rid of them. Because the interest rate's going up, insurance went up. This is the time to dump right now, you know, because you don't, I think it's going to take us probably about a year. We're a small mom and pop state, but we're going to definitely feel the impact within a year.
Yeah, man. I wanted to get your opinion on the market in the future before we wrapped up. So what do you see the market looking like in the next 18, 24 months?
The way how I see the market looking is we're going to have a dip, but it's not going to be a big change of a dip. And we're fortunate that, you know, the price inflation kind of played a big role in it. You know, the cost of material really went up dramatically, right? So that's going to be a big factor in how much the depreciation is going to be. Number one is if we do have a depreciation, I don't think it's going to exceed 10%, truthfully, because of the cost of material and the cost of everything. Number two is the dollar really doesn't have any value. If you look at it, you know, $100,000 can't even get you a car. A decent car right now is going for $100,000. So what makes you think that a hot property is going to go for $100,000? I think opportunity is going to be there to pick up a lot of these renovated, properties that distressed properties for maybe $100,000. Yes, the opportunity is going to be there. I think days on market is going to be a lot longer. You know, so I think there's a good opportunity for everybody to kind of adjust, you know, readjust yourself with the way you're doing the properties, meaning on renovations. If you're planning on renovating, you know, you got to go out a little bit of overscale to kind of not stay that average 30 to 90 days, you know, because a lot of guys kind of felt comfortable where they'd list the property and it's gone within a week. Well, the average before the pandemic happened was about 30 to 45 days, you know, on a complete renovation. And then also calculate your finance, meaning what I mean by calculate your finances, if you got a hard money loan or if you're getting a finance, I know a lot of guys kind of, you know, look at it at a 30-day markup, right? So you're thinking, I'll be able to pay up that debt within 45 days. Right now, I would look into 6 months in the near future. You know, it might take, I mean, you could get lucky. On average, it takes about 90 days, but always, you know, expect the worst and pray for the best, you know, so calculate about 6 months.
You talking about hard money, monthly payments or paying
Well,
it back on time?
you're going to be in loan by the time you list the property till the time you close it. You know, it might take, it usually doesn't take 6 months, but it'll take maybe about 3 months to kind of close it out, you know.
Yeah.
Right now, we've been really lucky, man. I've been closing deals within, truthfully, 30 days, 25 days, you know.
You talking about listed?
Listing, yes, on the back end,
Yeah.
on the back end side.
So what is 2022 Nelson, how does 2022 Nelson advise 2007 Nelson that's just getting in the game? What
My
advice you giving
advice
them?
to everybody right now, if you're getting into the game, I would concentrate on first-time home buying areas around the $200,000 markup, right? That's going to be the sweet spot. It's always been the sweet spot. You know, under 200 is always going to be the sweet spot. Another thing that I would advise is wait for your opportunity. You know, I know there's a lot of houses that are going to hit the market. You know, if it's meant for you, it's meant for you. You know, there's going to be enough opportunities out there for everybody. There's a lot of foreclosures happening. A lot of fellows with the insurance going up are going to also be put in bad spots. I would truthfully concentrate on first-time home buyers, especially if you are starting under the 200 ARV markup. You know, if you're around the 200, you don't really have much to worry about. You're always going to find a buyer. You know, if you're going over 200, not more than 250. You know, if you're going into the 300s, then you got to do execution. Execution meaning renovation. They really got to like the house. What's going to separate you from everybody else is right now, if you list a property, for example, you look up 70131, you might find 6 renovated properties, right? Down the road, if you look up 70131, you might find 20 renovated properties. What's the difference between you you and them, is execution. You know, everybody's going to be almost about the same square footage, price per square foot. It's the execution of your project is what's going to get you to the next level.
Yeah, and how do we build a crew to get that part done?
The crew.
Get them to answer.
Listen, I'm going to be honest with you right now. The right answer to that is the crew right now. You know, everybody's kind of busy with IDA, right? So the crew, I would expect, you know, the IDA traffic kind of to be done with probably August. You know, I mean, if you look at the roofing guys, and I got a lot of roofing guys. In the beginning, I would call them up and I'll tell them, hey, and look, let me tell you, I had roofing crews that were putting on before IDA the square for $40, right? So I call them during the hurricane. I'm like, hey, man, I need you to put on roof. He's like, well, you know the price change. I'm like, I know the price change. How much is it going to cost? He's like, at least $100 a square. I'm like, I'll give you $100 a square, right? So they come in, and keep in mind, I'm paying $60 a square extra, right? And this is right after the hurricane. I don't even know how much they were supposed to charge, you know? But I had to put roofs on a lot of these properties. I pay them $100 a square. And then I'm thinking to my head, I just paid literally like $2,000 extra on a roof on labor, right? So they get off the roof, and I'm like, oh, man, I'm going to wait for the right opportunity to get this, because it's not going to stay busy, right? So I promise him, you know, if it slows down, I'm definitely not going to bring him back. You know what I mean? I mean, you got me $60 a square. So long story short, he calls me last week, right? He's like, hey, man, where the hell you been at? You stopped calling me for the roofs. And I'm like, man, you're charging me $100 a square. I got somebody to do it for 70. You know, he's like, oh, well, I could do it for 60. I was like, too late. You charged me 100 when I needed you, you know? So, I mean, I had kind of brought everybody to a point where it's hard finding good help. A lot of these guys, man, they made a lot of money during the hurricane. It's a seasonal thing, you know? After the hurricane, you're going to have a big opportunity of building the right crew, you know? And what I mean by building the right crew, what I mean by that, sometimes I would pay a lot, not a lot, but a little bit extra for somebody that I know does a good job. You know, it's quality over quantity. You know what I mean? I pay a little bit extra as long as it comes up clean and I don't have to go back and revisit, you know, prior to, you know, paying a little bit less and coming out with a sloppy job.
Gotcha. And we're going to take questions in a little while. And Steve, you're going to come up and do our needs and wants. But man, Nelson, we appreciate you coming out
I
tonight.
appreciate everybody. I wish everybody the best of luck, and looking forward to growing and meeting my fellow investors. And hopefully the next cycle is going to be a really progressive cycle for everybody.
And how can we help you? What's Nelson looking for right now? How can we help
Honestly,
you?
man, you know, what I'm looking for is success. You know, the way how I look at it is I want everybody to grow. You know, I'm going to be lying to you if I tell you I need the money. You know, I don't need the money. You know, I'm at a point where right now I'm satisfied where I'm at. If you got deals and you could pass them on, that would be great. You know, but the main reason why I really want to come here is because I have nothing to sell. You know, I'm not here to sell anything. You know, I really wish that I had this opportunity when I first started. You know what I mean? It was kind of difficult on finding the right advice. And if I could be any help to any individual in this room in the near future, I would gladly, you know, extend my hand to help anybody here.
Yeah, we'll take questions. Courtney?
All right, so I hear you that you're a cyclical investor, meaning, you know, when the getting's good, you're flipping, you're keeping rentals to build up your future flipping inventory. What's the long-term goal for you? What's the legacy goal for you? I heard that you didn't want to leave, you know, debt to your kids. What does that look like, Nelson?
You know, honestly, that's a good question. You know, over the past years, you know, I got to a point where I don't really need to be doing this, you know, and a lot of times I sit down and, you know, I spend some time with my mother and I spend some time with my wife and my kids, and I think about it and it's like, I don't need to be doing this. But it's sad to say, man, like I said, this is an addiction. You know, opportunity comes, man, and honest to God, you know, a lot of times I sit at home and I'm thinking to my head, this is the last project I want to do, and then I get a phone call, you know, and you got $50,000 on the table, you know, and it's like, why would I turn it down? You know, it's hard, you know, it's really hard. But I honestly think that this is probably going to be my last cycle, the one coming up. And what I mean by that is, I'm ready to fold. I might buy a nice rental portfolio and kind of hang on to it. And I don't think I'm going to do the renovation part, but I might just come around and, 7, 8 years down the road and just get rid of them, And I pick up a lot of properties through fellow investors that been through this cycle. I picked up plenty of properties through people that been through the same kind of thing that I've been, where they have 20, 30, I picked up one time a property from a guy. I was completely shocked. He owned 400 and probably 30 something single family houses, and he was scattered all over the place. I picked up the Westbank ones, and I couldn't even pick them up all at the time. He had like 53 or 54 properties. All what he wanted was just out, and I think I'm going to get to that stage soon. I don't think it's going to be a long time before I get to it, but I'm hoping probably within 7, 8 years, from today. No problem.
I talked to an attorney not too long ago, and he's saying that the foreclosure market is going to be heating up pretty soon,
Yes,
October and November.
that's absolutely right. So a lot of these banks, they like to dump their projects before the end of the year, right? A lot of these banks, when you get towards the end of the year, they want to get rid of a lot of these properties. But the thing is, with our market, we're a small market. New Orleans is a small market. Usually, if you start to see the impact with the larger markets, right? So the way how I'm situated right now, I'm kind of starting to see days on market. Days on market are expanding, meaning like I'm listing the properties. Usually, within a week, I'll have multiple offers, right? This is on the resale side, right? On the resale side, now it's taken a month, and a month is pretty long, especially if you're used to a week. You're used to a week being under contract, now it's taking us a month. On the foreclosure side, they're popping up. I'm seeing them pop up. There's a lot that are popping up. It's going to take a little bit longer, but I'm pretty sure what he mentioned was completely correct. So towards the end of the year, we should be seeing a lot of foreclosures. Another thing is, to the new investors that are in the market, and I know they're experienced at a hot market, and they're listing these properties within 1 month, they're going on the contract. When you list a property in a different time and it starts to sit on the market for 30, 40 days, you kind of start to panic, right? So you start checking up on it, what did I do wrong? That's the average market time, It always been, from 30 to 45 days, but we just got a little treat with the pandemic where it just got really hot,
No, we're going to wrap up, man. Again, Nelson, I just want everybody to give Nelson a round of applause. Thank you again for coming out.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate it, everybody.
Steve, you
Thank you.
come up.